Candide, I'll never forget this vision of Candide. It was like a tiny copy stuck in a guy's back pocket. So he wasn't reading it. I just saw him walking with Candide stuck in his back pocket. Hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today's video was inspired by the time earlier in March when I saw a guy in the metro reading this book, and I said, the cover looks interesting, the title looks interesting. Let me look it up and see if I'd be interested in reading it. And I looked it up on Goodreads right there on the metro, and I said, I've actually already read this book, translated into English, so that's why I didn't recognize the title. And I really enjoyed it. It was a great book. And I said to myself, like, wait a second, should I be paying attention to the books that people are reading in the metro? Is this a possible source of like excellent recommendations? So I just basically started keeping track, and like obviously a lot of the times I wasn't interested in reading the book, but I just started like keeping a list, and then after I had about like 5 or 6, I was like, oh, this would actually make a great video. And I don't know, I just kept the list going, and after about a month I had 15 books. So I was like, sure, why not? Let's throw together a video and see what happens. I've read a few of these books, I've heard a few of these books, and I would say the majority, about half of them maybe, I've never heard of them before. Some of them I know for a fact I don't want to read. Others I'm like pretty neutral about, and some I'm like, oh, I actually really do want to read that. So I'll just mention those as I go. But let's get started with the first book that inspired it all. It's Cahier d'un retour au pays natal, or Notebook, sorry, what is it in English? Or in English, Notebook of a Return to My Native Land. This is by Aimé Cesar, who's a very famous Black Francophone writer. He's from Martinique, and he's written a ton of really important books. I think this one is his most famous book, and this is also the book where he introduces the concept of negritude, which is, I won't get into it in this video, but it's like a very important concept in Black thought, and he and 2 other Black students in Paris in the 30s came up with this concept, and in this book he sort of explains what it is, I think for the first time in print. So I read this when I was a freshman in college, and I loved it. I could not tell you anything about it because that was more than 15 years ago, but I really, really loved it. It had a huge impact on me, and this is why I knew that maybe like taking a peek at Metro books was maybe worth it. So the next one I have also read and enjoyed, Brave New World by not George Orwell. Why did I write George Orwell? That's so funny. And I made a little spreadsheet. It's not by George Orwell. It's by, who's it by? Aldous Huxley. Can you tell I did this very late at night a few weeks ago and didn't look at it until this moment? Okay, cool. So Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. It's a ultra classic. It's super classic. This person was reading it in English, so that I have no idea. And I should probably add in here that when I say these are the books being read by Parisians on the metro, I have no idea if they're really Parisians. They could be tourists, they could be expats, immigrants, who knows, but they're being read on the Paris metro. So plenty of French people read in English, obviously, but I'm never like evaluating whether or not someone's like a local or not. I'm just looking at the books and barely at the person. And I'll also add here that there's a lot of books missing from this list because I could see someone was reading, and just the way they were holding the book and the fact that they didn't move that position, I wasn't about to like, you know, or ask them or bother them, you know, all that stuff. So some of them are not on here, but that's okay. Next up is Convenience Store Woman by Sayata Maruta. I've read this one as well for book club. I also really enjoyed it. It's about a woman who works in a convenience store, and she goes through some really wild adventures in terms of relationships, and basically loves working in the convenience store and wants to have respect for that, and I really enjoyed that one. Next up is, I saw someone reading it in French, and in French it's called Le Pingouin. I should learn how to say penguin in French, but in English it's called The Death and the Penguin, or Death and the Penguin, and it's by Andreï Kourkov, and it's written in Russian, but I believe he's Ukrainian. And I'll just read the, for the ones I'm not familiar with, I wrote a little description for myself. So basically he's a writer. Our protagonist is a writer who is forced to make his living by writing obituaries, but for people who haven't died yet for some reason. I'm not sure why that is. And then basically his stuff is never printed because the people he's writing the obituaries for seem to live on and on. So I'm assuming they're like famous people who, like, you know, when someone famous dies, they want the obituary kind of like pre-written so they can like just run it. But anyway, so the first time an obituary of his is printed, he quickly realizes that he and his pet penguin, Misha, have been drawn into a trap. So I'm not sure if that's like supposed to be like magical realism or if it's just a man living with a penguin. I can't imagine. I can't imagine it's a real penguin, but who knows? It actually intrigues me. I actually want to put this on my list and see if I can get my hands on a copy because now I'm really curious. All right, so that was sort of the literary fiction section, and now we're moving on to genre fiction. So we have Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. I think everyone pretty much knows what this is. It's a part of a huge series. It's a massive book, and it's about feudal England, and it's centered around building a cathedral. You know, pretty standard, very well-known historical fiction. Also read in English. Then we have The City of Windows by Robert Pobi, P-O-B-I, I'm not sure how to say that. And this one is the first of 3 police thrillers. So this one's about a former FBI agent who goes back onto the case because another FBI agent has been killed by a sniper who has some amazing talent that the FBI has never seen before. So again, thrillers and police thrillers are definitely not my thing, but does sound interesting. And then we have Something to Hide by Elizabeth George. And this is a police thriller set in London, and when a detective is taken off life support, the autopsy reveals that it was actually murder, and that launches a whole new investigation. And then this one is a French, I think it's a police thriller. It's called 18.13 Une année à la PJ. So like, it's like 18.3, a year at the police department. Like PJ is like police judiciaire. And I actually am not sure what this book is about because it's supposed to be a novel, but the description says that the author spent a year like kind of following police officers. I don't know if it was for inspiration or just to make sure it was super realistic or what, but basically it's a book about different police officers and them talking about the cases that haunted them, the unsolved cases that they never managed to solve. So at first that made me think it was nonfiction, like she, you know, spent a year getting to know all these police officers and learning their stories, but then it's listed as a novel, a roman. So like, I'm very confused what this book's about, but it seems interesting. I don't know. It's not translated, so if you've read it in French, let me know. And then we have one romance. So Child's Play by Danielle Steele, being read in English. And I looked up the description. The description is basically like this mom who's a perfectionist and she has 3 children. And then all at the same time, all her children kind of like do something or become something that she doesn't like. It's not fitting in her like picture perfect idea of what her children should be. And from the, you know, reviews and like the description, you can kind of tell that one of her kids is gay. And another one like either doesn't want to get married but have a kid or is having a kid out of wedlock, something like that. I was like, oh, this must be written in the 80s, you know, when these kinds of things were like a problem for a lot of people. And no, it was published in 2019. So I actually like am so curious. I don't get it. Like I don't get how that's compelling in 2019, but who knows? Maybe that's Danielle Steele's demographic. That's where they are and they need to hear those stories. And also it's listed as a romance, but it doesn't really mention the romance. So I think there must be a romance kind of at some point and that man maybe helps her realize she doesn't need to have this picture perfect family. I don't know. Like I said, not my cup of tea, but does sound kind of interesting. And then we have, last but not least, of course, French literature. And first on the list is L'étranger by Albert Camus, so The Stranger by Albert Camus. This one was being read in French, and of course it's a classic, very well known, about a man who decides to, on impulse, kill someone on the beach, and then he obviously is caught, and he, you know, kind of reflects on a lot of philosophical topics while he's waiting to find out how the trial ends. And then we have Candide by Voltaire. So this is another very philosophical book, very classic, very famous, but this one's a little bit more funny. It's satire and it's pushing back against the idea of optimism. I have read The Stranger and liked it. I haven't read Candide yet, and it's on my list of things to read. It's very short. I just haven't gotten around to it. And then we've got La Femme Rompue, which is, I think, The Ruptured Woman. Something like that, by Simone de Beauvoir. So she is a very famous French feminist and writer, probably known best for her book, The Second Sex. I have not read that one yet. I haven't read this one yet. And actually, I didn't quite realize that she was like a fiction writer as well. So this is actually a collection of 3 novellas slash very long short stories, all about the lives of 3 different women past their youth and all facing unexpected crises. So that sounds very interesting. And a friend of mine I saw on Goodreads had read it and liked it. So I was like, okay. And now that's on my list of things I'd like to read myself, which I doubt I would have like picked out myself if I hadn't seen it on the Metro. So that's pretty cool. So the next one is very weird, and I'm never gonna read this book, but I'm very glad that this man exists. So it's a biography, and the guy was reading it in French. It's only available in French, not translated into any other languages. And it's called Devenir Feldenkrais, I think is how you say the guy's name, du Shtetl à la Méthode. So becoming Feldenkrais, from the Shtetl to the method. So this man, Feldenkrais, I'm not sure how to say his name, he is known for creating the Feldenkrais method, which is a method of healing. So it's like a healing modality. And so this isn't about the modality. He's written his own books about that during his lifetime, but this is a biography of the guy. And I'll just read out like the highlights of his biography because he seems like a fascinating person. So first he fled the Russian Revolution in 1918. He immigrated to Palestine. He worked there as a builder and became a cartographer. Then he went to France and became an engineer. He learned jiu-jitsu and actually became one of the first black belts of jiu-jitsu in Europe. And then he fled France when the Nazis arrived and left with scientific documentation specifically to be delivered to the British War Office. And then after that, he went back to Israel and he lived out his days perfecting what's now affectionately known as the Feldenkrais method. He just seems like a fascinating person. So even if I never read anything about this guy ever again, I'm really happy that I saw this book in the Metro, looked up the book, found out this guy existed, and now know a little bit about his life. So I'm quite pleased with that. Next up, we have a book. I'm not sure how to say it. It's actually the name of an island, in fact. It's called Peleliu, I want to say. It's a novel by Rolin, and again, not available in English translation. And I actually have no idea like what this is. I assume it's a novel, but the description of the book: sitting on this bench, listening to water creatures, or amphibians, disturbed by my arrival, gurgling in their flight. I thought of the gag, a classic, of the guy who sits on a tree trunk and discovers, too late, that it is in fact a crocodile. And I thought that the latter, having the reputation of living old, there were probably still some in the mangrove who had witnessed the battle and perhaps had seized this opportunity to introduce some variety into their diet. And that's the back of the book. I'm not sure, maybe Jean Rolin has like some sort of reputation about being like a funny writer or something, but yeah, it's kind of a mystery to me. So if you've heard of it and know what it's about, let me know. And last but not least is Loin by Alexis Michalik, I think is probably how you say his name. And this one, at first I thought it was romance, but then I realized it's not. It's actually about a brother and sister who decide to go on a road trip following the steps of their father, who had abandoned them decades earlier. And they kind of do a little road trip all across Europe and Asia. So that seems interesting, but I'm not super interested in it myself. So just to recap, I have read, let's see, 1, 2, 3 of these, 4 of these books. And I actually want to add 3 books to my TBR based off this list, and that is the Death and the Penguin book, the Candide, of course, and the Simone de Beauvoir book. So I'm pretty happy with that. You know, there's 15 books on this list, and I read some, I want to read some, and some of them, it's just nice to know they exist in the world, and that's that. So I don't know, what did you expect this list was going to be? Does it line up to your expectations? I kind of feel that there's sort of this like stereotype about Paris, and actually, oh, there's a word for it. It's like It's basically tourists come to Paris and they get depressed because they thought Paris was like this magical, perfect place, and it's really just a city where people live and do their everyday lives. And it's very underwhelming to the tourists, so much that they get depressed. But Paris is the only city in the world where I think that happens. So I'm curious what you kind of thought Parisians might be reading in the Metro, if it's lined up to your expectations or not. I do actually think this is a pretty good representation of things that people read in the Metro. It was about 1/3 in English, 2/3 in French. The genre fiction I think is pretty accurate. The classics were super accurate. Actually, Candide, I'll never forget this vision of Candide. It was like a tiny copy stuck in a guy's back pocket. So he wasn't reading it. I just saw him walking with Candide stuck in his back pocket. But yeah, I think this is pretty typical actually of what Parisians read. But if you like this kind of video, I might make this into a sort of regular series, and just after I get, 10 to 20 different books noted on my, in my notes app on my phone, I can do another video. So let me know if you want to hear more about books being read on the Paris Metro, and until next time, bye.